Good morning. There we go. So I'm Phil Van Fossen. I'm the Ackerman Distinguished Professor of Social Studies Education and the Interim Dean of the College of Education here at Purdue University. And it's my honor to offer you a warm Boilermaker welcome to this inaugural Purdue AI in P12 Education Conference. As far as we know, this is the first conference of its kind in Indiana, and the college is very excited to take the lead in this area of ever-increasing importance, namely the use of artificial intelligence in education. Indeed, the response has been strong. This room holds about 600, so it doesn't look very full, but we've got over 250 attendees today for a choice of 50 sessions over the course of the day. For an inaugural conference, we're really happy with that. But sure, that's worth, okay. Wow. That's not even my applause line in the talk here, so that's great. So over my career, I've done a lot of research on internet use in social studies classrooms. And based on that experience, I think I have seen and continue to see some similar trends on the AI landscape. For example, consider that in 1994, my second year as an untenured assistant professor, and a mere 30 years ago, only about a third of K-12 classrooms across the country were wired for internet access, and usually with a single computer. By 2004, a mere 20 years ago and 10 years after that, 100% of K-12 classrooms across the country had internet access, and often with multiple computers, in the space of 10 short years. In 1994, many educators were very concerned about the dangers of internet use. And while people are still writing about such dangers today, just try imagining teaching in your classroom or anywhere in your school without the internet. It's impossible to conceive of that because it is so commonplace. In fact, it is ubiquitous. Renowned technologist and writer Peter Leiden believes that AI is on an even steeper adoption curve than the one I just described. He believes this is based on AI's real benefits for teachers and students. Among the benefits he lists, for example, are AI can personalize student learning by adopting lessons and resources to meet unique student needs. AI can streamline administrative tasks for teachers, allowing them to spend more time with their actual students. And finally, he notes that AI can help educators track students' progress more efficiently, identifying patterns that may indicate the need for intervention. All very powerful potential possibilities for AI. But Leiden also raises some important ethical and practical considerations, concerns about data privacy, potential for bias in AI algorithms, and misinformation and manipulation. He also stresses the need for professional development for educators, one of the reasons we wanted to run this conference, and for schools to establish clear guidelines to ensure that all AI tools are used responsibly and effectively. But if we focus on those challenges while at the same time leveraging those benefits I mentioned earlier that Leiden describes, he believes that educators can use artificial intelligence to create a more inclusive and effective learning environment for all students. So it's our sincere hope that no matter where you are in your AI and education journey, your experiences today will help you address one or more of these important issues. So again, I extend a warm Boilermaker welcome to this inaugural conference. We are very glad that you are here. Thanks for joining us. Again, not the applause line in my notes, no. It's now my pleasure to introduce the person most directly responsible by far for putting this conference together, Professor Bill Watson. Bill is a professor in our Learning Design and Technology program and director of the Purdue Center for Serious Games and Learning in Virtual Environments. More importantly, he chairs our AI Data Science Working Group and has been a key player in the development of the Purdue University-wide Masters in AI. In fact, he's helped design and is teaching the very first course in that master's program. So the College of Education, through Dr. Watson and many, many others, is contributing to Purdue's goal in AI. Without him, our efforts for this conference and our AI data science would not be nearly as successful as I think it is. So I want to say that we're very grateful for Bill's leadership and thank him. And if you would give him a very nice round of applause as he comes up to share some announcements and then introduce our keynote speaker. So, Dr. Bill Watson.
Welcome, and thank you very much for being here. Before I get started, I also wanted to give a few thanks. In particular, Bill Walker, sitting over there, runs for Catalyst, runs their STEM conference, which is happening again in January, their 10th year. So he was instrumental in answering so many questions that I emailed him over and over again, regardless of his travel. He was always very quick to get back to me and helped out a lot. So many, many thanks to him. Let's see. We are not driving. Let me see if I can duck around. Oh, we got it? All right. Okay. So I did want to share this. If you want to connect with the College of Education, any of our social media accounts, and keep track of the activities that we do have going on, we have fairly frequent, particularly on YouTube, when we have special guest lectures or we have Purdue faculty come in to give lectures in this area. Those are being shared up on our YouTube channel and across other social media channels. So that QR code will get you access to our College of Education channels to help keep track of this and other events like it. I also wanted to give a special thanks to our Level 3 sponsors. We have Magic School and AI Platform. They'll be here in the sponsor room, the exhibit hall. Ball State University Online Programs is a sponsor. And then we have several Purdue University sponsors, including Purdue Online. That's where the online master's in AI is being offered. And you can find more information about that, as well as my own program, Purdue Learning Design and Technology, and the Department of Curriculum and Instruction and their online programs. Offer a number of online masters that are entirely online that are options for you. I also wanted to share that the conference resources website is available. If you scan that, that will get you to the website. I also have the program up there if you want an easy way to check your program. That's listed on there. There's also a print program on there that you can access if you want to see some other additional details on there. I did want to give a heads up as I put all this together, which means all mistakes I own. In the print program, I managed to somehow leave out session 13, which is on the website program. It's up there. All the details are there. So I'll just read this out to make sure you're aware it's there in case you have a printed program in front of you. Session 13 takes place in Stewart 206. It is AI 101, Essential AI Experiences for Your Students. That is being put on by Jenna Garcia, who is Director of Educator Success for Next Tech, another one of our sponsors. Next Tech is a professional development around technology for teachers program specifically for Indiana. So I'm sure her session will be excellent as well. That is focused on AI tools for teachers and students and across all grade levels. So again, that's session 13 in Stewart 206, AI 101, Essential AI Experiences for Your Students. And again, that is up there in the website version of the program, just not the print. This is just a quick overlook at our schedule and where we will be at. After the keynote, we have 10 minutes to get to your first session 1 sessions, and then we will have a 40-minute break. So there's coffee, there's snacks, there's things like that, and those will be in Stewart 214. That's also where our sponsors will have their tables set up if you want to learn more information about their products. And we do have a number of presenters who are presenting about specific AI products who will be there if you want to learn more about the master's programs or anything like that. Lunch is also in Exhibit Hall, Stewart 214, And all of you will have, with your registration, will have a box lunch that you can pick up there. I did also want to highlight that today is Veterans Day, and so we wanted to applaud any veterans that we have in the audience. If we could take a moment for that, please. And coinciding with our first break, actually, there will be a celebration for Veterans Day in the Memorial Union. If you parked in the Grant Street garage, the Memorial Union is the building you walked through to get to Stewart. So in the Great Hall there, which if you're around during Christmas time, that's where the Christmas tree goes up, there will be a celebration taking place. There's also a field of flags, which is over the next week or so. There will be flags being placed outside the Union. So if you have a particular veteran that you want to honor, you can go by PMU 118 and pick up a flag and place it in the lawn outside. I also wanted to highlight last month in Indianapolis, the largest homeless shelter for veterans had a fire, and so they are doing a fundraiser to try to rebuild with that. So I put a QR code up here for that GoFundMe in case you're interested in donating to that fund and helping to restore that veterans homeless shelter. A few reminders as well. We have both 50-minute kind of practical sessions, and then we have research sessions. So they're both 50 minutes. The research sessions are divided up into 3 presentations for those 50 minutes. So if you're a presenter in a research session, do please be mindful of your time, that you'll have 2 other presenters in there with you. So we're allowing 15 minutes for each of those research presentations, and then 5 minutes at the end for questions for any and all of them. So do please try to help each other, keep track of time, and be mindful of that for your co-presenters. Did want to highlight that if you're posting about the conference on social media, these are the hashtags we would love for you to use to help out the College of Ed spread information about this conference. And then we do have 3 reserved working rooms for collaboration meetings, or if you're looking for some place to eat your lunch, if you want to talk with an old friend you ran into, or someone who's doing similar work, or someone who had an insightful question. Stewart 218, 311, and 313 are reserved for you to be able to slip in there. And I think, I'm forgetting which room, one of those is really quite large, so it fits a lot of people. Over 218 fits over 100 people in there. So feel free to use those. I did put that up on the print program map. Those rooms are specified there as well. So if you need to drop in someplace or just looking for an easy place to eat your lunch, those are available for you as well. Finally, I wanted to highlight Trail, Transforming AI for Learning. This is an alternate reality game that some excellent graduate students in my educational game design course in the spring. I pitched this as a potential project, that educational game that they could be working on. We had a couple of teams, and this team won out for having theirs adopted. They pitched that to Purdue Online to see if they wanted to fund it. Its development ahead of this conference and ahead of the, there's a Google Purdue AI Summit in Indianapolis later this week. And so Purdue Online funded that, and those students spent the summer and part of the fall getting that developed. So an alternate reality game you can kind of think of as sort of a transmedia escape room sort of thing. It's a mystery narrative around a missing Purdue AI professor, and you help solve that by learning about AI. So that is available, will be available for a couple more weeks. It is Purdue-centric, but certainly not limited to Purdue people. So if you have students who might be interested in solving that, or if you want to check it out yourself, that URL is there, and I believe we've sent that out in the emails we sent to you as well, so you can get access to that. We would love for you to participate. With that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Stephen Aguilar of USC. Very excited to have him here to join us. I went on a little search to try to see who I felt would be the ideal speaker for our inaugural program. I wanted to make sure I got someone that was very proud to bring forward and that I thought would really be a benefit to all of our attendees. So Stephen is who I settled on for a variety of reasons. I'll give you his bio and then talk a little bit about why that was that I settled on him. So Dr. Stephen J. Aguilar is an associate professor of education in the educational psychology concentration at the USC Rogier School of Education. His research focuses on investigating how educational technologies, both emerging and established, influence teaching, learning, and motivation. Dr. Aguilar studies the impact of generative AI in educational settings, the digital equity gap, and learning analytics applications. Currently, he is co-leading USC's new Center for Generative AI and Society's efforts to understand when and how generative AI is used by students and instructors in post-secondary settings. His honors and awards include winning both the Wilbert J. McKeechee Early Career Award for Motivation and Education Research and the AERA Division C Early Career Award. His work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the American Educational Research Association, the National Institutes of Health, and the U.S. Army Research Office, among others. Dr. Aguilar has also given televised interviews on the digital equity gap in both English and Spanish, has been guest on NPR's Air Talk, and has been interviewed by the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Bloomberg, and the Washington Post. His digital equity work during the pandemic also informed California Assembly Bill number 1176, which provided much-needed subsidies for families in need of broadband internet. The resulting Affordable Connectivity Program has helped over 1 million families afford reliable high-speed internet during the pandemic and beyond. Dr. Aguilar received a BA in Philosophy and Psychology from Georgetown University, a MA in the Humanities Philosophy from the University of Chicago, and a PhD in Education and Psychology from the University of Michigan. Previously, he taught 6th and 7th grade in East Palo Alto, California, and served as the Director of Institute Technology for Teach for America, Los Angeles' Summer Institute. So his work on digital equity and paying attention to, I tend to be an early adopter with technology, but I think it's so important to have a clear eye. And when I teach our students on technology integration in the classroom, that's one of the key things that we talk about is why are you doing this? What are the negatives you get for integrating the technology, and what are the positives, and do the positives outweigh the negatives? So I think it's really important while everyone tries to get on board the train that's quickly moving along, as Phil mentioned, that we keep a clear eye as to potential negatives that can come about that sort of adoption. And so I think Stephen's work on digital equity is a great example of having a clear eye and understanding that we don't want to be leaving more people behind when we adopt new technologies, and we want to be paying close attention to issues around potential negatives that could arise with those as well. So I'm very excited to invite him here. We're very lucky to have him and really appreciative of him flying all the way out here from California and doing a keynote at what is very early in the morning for him. So please give him a warm welcome, and we're very glad you're here. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, is that working? Okay. Thanks for having me. So yeah, that was like all the things I've done. So I'm happy that someone introduced me that way. So I'm here to talk about, as the slides say, defend human intelligence. I think one of the things that we often think about when it comes to AI is we become enamored with a new technology without really questioning why we're doing it. So first I'll start with two images that we should ponder. The first one here, if you remember from the Olympics, was an advertisement about using Gemini to help someone's daughter write to their sports idol. The second is basically someone who waited to the last minute to do something, right? This idea of, can I turn 150 pages into a presentation into a 15-minute presentation before today's meeting? And I tie these together because effectively one is education, one is workforce development, and as teachers, you sit in the middle, right? It doesn't matter which grade you teach. We are on this pathway to train students to do what's next and what's required of them in the workforce. So it's important for us to hold those images together as I go through these slides. So AI has become this new inflection point. And when I say that, I mean a couple of things, right? This is, if you're not familiar with it, one of my favorite visualizations of technology adoption, or basically the hype around technology adoption. It's the Gartner hype cycle. And if you look at the peak, the idea is whenever there's a new technology, everyone gets super excited about the technology. It can do everything. It's sort of this omni machine that will be able to fix a lot of problems that we thought were unfixable. After a while, though, we begin to sort of go down the roller coaster and begin to realize that there are limits to what's possible given the technology that we're talking about. After we go through that trough of disillusionment, right, we get to the slope of enlightenment. And that's when we begin to realize, okay, this is what I can actually do with the new technology. This is how I can be productive. And I argue that we're still in this phase where we're a little bit overly enamored with what AI can do, but we'll get to the point where we can be productive with it. So Gen AI is the new technology trigger. You can, it's hard to, if you're an educator, go more than 24 hours without reading either a thought piece, some new article, a district making a good or bad decision about AI and how they're responding to it. So what is AI? Let's start there, because one of the challenges with discussing AI is really figuring out what people mean when they talk about AI. So AI, we can break down into 3 different ways. There's narrow AI, which is weak AI, general AI, and super intelligent AI. So I'll go through each of these in a second. Narrow AI is AI for all intents and purposes. When we're thinking about AI, it performs narrow tasks very well. It operates in limited contexts. And when you think of AI in use, that's effectively what you're thinking about. So for those of us who sort of allow Apple to read our faces to unlock our phones, which is me and a number of people, that's AI, right? It gets trained on a lot of data to do that very narrow task very well. It always recognizes me, which is scary, but at the same time, I don't want to plug a number into my phone. It currently exists, and this is what we're using every day. Strong AI is this idea, the AI that you see in the movies often. It can understand in human-like ways, so I use this sort of little vignette to sort of think about it, right? If you're playing with an AI companion, they might have fashion sense, they might be playing a game, in this case chess, incorrectly. They would have judgments about the social interaction that they're having. All this happens at once, right? That's why it's general AI, because everything that we think of as intelligence is coexisting in this interaction. Think about a friend or a peer, except instead of a person, you're dealing with a machine or an AI generated, or sort of an AI intelligence. This also doesn't exist currently, right? So, but when folks are thinking about, or when you hear OpenAI talk about moving towards general AI, this is what they're referring to. Super intelligent AI is this idea of what's after that, right? Not only is it human, it's actually better than human in the sense that it can perform tasks better than we can. It's more creative, wiser, better at problem solving. It also doesn't exist, so it's not something that we need to worry about. But AI, as currently envisioned, focuses on this idea of large language models. So I'll pause here and just break down what LLMs are, because I think it's important for us to have a sort of a deep understanding of what it is that's powering this next generation of AI technologies. So first, I'll invite some audience participation. So roses are red, violets are blue. Knock, knock. Okay. Now, just think in your head, what could you make with these ingredients? If I give you tomatoes, basil, garlic, pasta, and some ground beef, what could you potentially make? Spaghetti, right? So you are all now an LLM, right? And the idea here is that LLMs do exactly what you just did right now, but at scale. So the idea here is that LLMs studied millions of recipes. They've seen many cooking shows. They've observed countless chefs cook. And what they do is they understand the patterns associated with each of those activities and all that language, and they can replicate and predict what should happen next. So what you just did a second ago is what LLMs do. Given a certain amount of information, I can predict what should come after. But they just do it with language. So given a set of words, the chef can combine those words into ingredients, into plausible combinations or sentences. But they don't understand what's happening, right? So that's what's important here. That's why it's not general AI. That's why it's narrow AI. ChatGPT, all of these generative AI models do not understand what they're doing. They're simply seeing a collection of data and predicting what ought to come next. So if I give you a more technical definition, right, LLMs rely on what's known as transformers, which take sequential data. And we often don't think about language as sequential data, but that's what it is. It's structured such that if we read in an ordered way, in the West, left to right, we know when words are misspelled. There's a grammar, right? It's this structured data that we thought wasn't data, right? We thought it was a uniquely human thing, but it's actually sequential data. And what transformers do is they consider the relationships between these words, right? If given a word in the corpus, in the language that exists, am I predicted to follow? Now, they can do this because they were trained on massive amounts of data, massive amounts of human data, of basically what we all wrote down on the internet. And that's why these models can predict what comes next. But when I frame it that way, we might think about, well, what might go wrong with this approach? If we are focused on prediction, given a set of data, what might actually happen if I predict using a finite amount of data? So it isn't the case that LLMs are trained on all human language. It's bound by a data set. So here, I'll read this because I'm not sure if you can see that from the back. But so this was a Reddit post, and someone posed a question. How many R's are in the word strawberry? The word strawberry, ChatGPT replies, has 2 R's. No, it's 3. Actually, strawberry has 2 R's. The spelling is S-T-R-A-W-B-E-R-R-Y. Count them again slowly. Sure, let's count them. There are indeed 2 R's in strawberry. You're right, strawberry does have 3 R's when you break it down like that. Thanks for pointing it out. And then finally, I apologize for any inconvenience. You are correct that strawberry is spelled with 2 R's. So we can think about why does this happen? And I'll get into why this happens in a second, but just think to yourself, why would this happen given what I just said about how LLMs function? Here's another example. Well, that's actually something that makes me angry, right? When cheese slides off a pizza, it is a horrible experience because they have to pick it up, try to remake the pizza, and it's just a mess. So if I were trying to solve this problem with AI, I might pose a question. How can I make sure that my cheese does not slide off of the pizza? Now, early on, when Google launched its AI, one of the answers was using Elmer's glue. So again, we see another failure or another limitation of generative AI. So you can think now as LLMs as potentially a confused chef, right? Because they're predicated and they're built off of the data they have, meaning there's a lot of data, but where's that data from? Who wrote the training data set? Who decided which data set was going to go into the large language model? And all data sets, it doesn't matter where they're from, are limited. But how are they limited? That's another important question. In this case, they were limited because a lot of these mistakes came from Reddit posts. And I'm on Reddit. I don't know who else is in this room, but a lot of things happen on Reddit that are untrue and impolite. So if that's your data set, if that's where you're drawing your information from, then it stands to reason that some of the things that LLM spits out will be incorrect in somewhat funny and obvious ways. So my point here is that AI has limits, as all tools and technologies do. So let's go back in time and think about something that we don't consider a technology, writing. Writing is uniquely human, but we haven't been a species that writes forever, right? This is something that we developed. It's a technology that we developed. The only thing that's changed is its ubiquity, so, right? It's everywhere, and we just assume that it happens. But again, we have to teach our students to read and write. So this is something that is a technology that we developed but hasn't been around forever. Socrates hated writing, and it's something that we might not think about. In his writings, which he didn't write down, someone wrote down what he said. He thought that it would introduce forgetfulness, that those who write will not practice using their memory, right? He thought that we need to remember things, and if you write it down, well, you're not practicing using your memory. The bottom here, for the most part, they will know nothing. If you write too much, you're not going to know anything because you're relying on this sort of disembodied thing to collect your thoughts, right? So a new technology, pioneer of the time said, this new thing is bad, right? Conrad Gessner is another important figure when it comes to the development of technologies, but specifically when it comes to books. So he was active during the 1500s. He's known as the father of bibliography, which I guess that's fun. He wrote Bibliotheca Universalis, which was a collection of roughly 3,000 books, which was almost all the books at the time, right? There weren't that many books back then because, remember, they were all handwritten. So he thought there were too many books. He went around Europe, counted the books, created the bibliography, and he thought there were just too many. Specifically, he wrote, "The multitude of books which grows every day in a prodigious fashion will make the following centuries fall into a state as barbarous as that of the centuries that followed the fall of the Roman Empire." Right? So there's so many books that it's going to lead to the destruction of civilization. We can prevent this danger by separating those books which we must throw out or leave in oblivion from those which we should save. Right? So this idea of there's just too many words, we need to find the good words, find the good books, and discard everything else. And this was with about 3,000 books, right? It wasn't that much. But again, someone at the time saw this new inflection point in what was happening with human technologies, in this case books, and was pushing back against it. So I want to give us some tools to begin to parse any new technology, right? I'm not necessarily here to walk folks through specifically Gen AI technologies, and I'll get into sort of what we can do with them towards the back end of this talk. But before that, I want to give us some tools to even begin to think about philosophy, or think about technologies, and think about how we might parse the relationship that we have with our technologies. So, as Bill said, I have 2 degrees in philosophy, so I use it a lot to ground my thinking, but I also think about design a lot. And these 2 things help me create what I consider a mental toolkit for parsing any new technology that I'm presented with. So first, I will hopefully not bore you, but I'll get into Heidegger's ontology. But there are only 2 things that are important here. This notion of present at hand and this other notion of ready to hand. So ready to hand are tools that exist as extensions of the self. So the whole point that Heidegger made, well, one of a lot of points, is a dense book, but one of the points that he made in this book was this idea that humans live an embodied existence through the use of their tools. So think about any tool that you use and that you not only use, that you forget you're using, right? Some go-to examples are if you drive, you don't think about driving, you just drive. When you use a pen, you just write. You don't necessarily think about the pen unless it breaks. So think about any tool that you're using in this way. That's a tool that's ready to hand, right? So in this example, Kermit just furiously typing away. Once you're good at typing, you don't think about typing, you just write. You just sort of put your thoughts down on the page. I can't chop like that, but if I could, I'd be super excited, right? This idea of using a knife in a way that was so masterful that I'm not actually scared about cutting myself. So tools that you use in this way are ready to hand. Now let's discuss present at hand. Does anyone want to offer a guess? You can just yell it out about what this thing is. Yeah. Okay, so I hear shoehorn. What makes you think it's a shoehorn, just out of curiosity?
Well, actually,
That's fine. Let's go with guess.
because the little foot-shaped thing on the bottom.
Okay, yeah. Foot-shaped thing on the bottom, and it has a handle, right? So, but what do you think it is? Because you changed your mind.
I feel like I saw something similar on TikTok recently. There was like
Okay, so it could be a new trend. So I hope once you see what it is, that would be amazing. But so there's a couple things to think about when you think about what you think this tool is. So hopefully you guessed in your mind, at least. And you might have seen you might have attended to a couple things within this image. It's got a handle, it kind of looks like a foot. You can kind of see yourself using it somehow. I've gotten lots of guesses from it's a fake leg, which would be a poor substitute for a leg, to a weapon. So you're beginning to see how you would use this tool. It's actually an apple butter paddle.
That's what I said.
So, this was news to me, but the idea behind when you make apple butter, which I've never made, but I believe this, is that you have to constantly stir it because it's going to singe at the bottom. So you need a big long paddle. It needs to have holes because apple butter is very viscous. So you're constantly manipulating it or agitating it so that it doesn't burn. So now that I've given you that information, you could probably figure out how to use this tool, right? You've now sort of clicked from a tool that's present at hand, a tool that you're not quite sure how it works, to a tool that's ready to hand. You could probably use it. Maybe not as well as the woman in the picture, but you could still figure it out now that you know what it's for. So again, ready to hand is this idea that I know how to use this, and I can use it without thinking. So whenever you use a tool and you don't think about it, you just use it, that's a tool that's ready to hand. When there's a tool that's broken, or it's a new tool, and you're unfamiliar with it, that's a tool that's present at hand. And that distinction becomes important when we start to think about new technologies and how we might incorporate them into our personal or professional practice. And this is why design matters, right? That's why I posed the question, what did you attend to? What did you pay attention to when you looked at this new technology that I presented? And when we're thinking about design, it's important to think about perceived affordances. So this idea of design suggests a use. Especially, well, when humans design something, we design it in such a way where its potential use is made apparent to us. So the most obvious example that Norman thought of that I have adopted is doors, right? If a door has a push plate, you will likely want to push the door. If a door has a handle, you will likely want to pull the door. Its design suggests its use. When that's broken, we get annoyed. Right, so this was a candy shop in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they had this sign, so I just took the picture because it makes the point that I want to make. So I'll just read it in case for those of you in the back. The door doesn't open the way you think it does, unless you think it's a push door. Then you'd be right? Because again, you can even see through the other side. There are two pull handles, and constantly, I did this. I didn't read the sign. I was like, whatever, it's a door. So I pulled the door towards me, and then realized I'm like, oh. Push, right? Because the design and the perceived affordance disagreed with each other. There was sort of this lack of alignment between what I thought I should do with the door versus what was actually there. So when we're thinking about educational technologies, this idea holds. It's similar, but the perceived affordances are complex. So here are Gen AI's perceived affordances, or this is actually just one example of generative AI, right? So hopefully, and the bottom part is actually new. Before, we just used to be a chat prompt. But at the beginning, the idea was, it poses a question, what can I help with? And then what it does is it begins to give you some perceived affordances, or some affordances. It says it can help, and it says it can help doing these things specifically. So it begins to suggest some perceived affordances. There's no Keynote button, unfortunately, so I had to do this all by myself. When I sifted these, this is how I thought about the list of possibilities, right? There's ideation, there's analysis or synthesis, depending on what you want it to do, and there's efficiency, right? These are just affordances that I've come up with, but again, the tricky thing about new AI technologies is it's not that simple. It's not simply the case that you automatically know what you can do with it. And that's the challenge, right? Because it's a chat interface. You think you can pose a question, it'll give you something, but because it's so fluid and constantly changing, its affordances shift as a result. So I went through some examples. So I, 4 weeks ago, started a YouTube channel. It's to help graduate students basically navigate the academy. And I use AI to help me basically come up with things I don't have time for, like titles. So I have the YouTube video where it has timestamps and things I talk about, and I basically say, based off of these chapters, help me come up with titles, and I say specifically that are catchy and are under 44 characters because that matters for some reason. It comes up with some titles, and then I go through and I'm like, well, I like that one. And that's the one I used. There it is. So, but I want to get into some trade-offs because I think it's important for us to, as we see what AI is capable of, to understand what we're leaving on the table when we decide to use generative AI technologies. So one of the first trade-offs is you cede some of your creativity to this black box algorithm. I could have thought of my own catchy titles, and some might say I should have. But I very deliberately decided to say, well, I don't want to be creative or generative in this way. I want basically assistance. I also could have called friends, but no one wants to talk about my YouTube channel. You also give more of your data to the large language model for free. Now that's in air quotes because it's not necessarily free. I get to use the platform for free. So it's this exchange where I give it my data, my words, and then it generates other words. So you can sort of think of it as a transaction. Whether or not that transaction is something that you agree with, that's up to you. we risk over-reliance. I could keep doing this forever and then just never get good at YouTube titles. I'm okay with that. But again, when we're thinking about other types of over-reliance, that question might shift, especially as we're thinking about our students and how they might over-rely and not sort of build that foundation. And that's a different question, right? I'm old enough to know what I know and to be able to push the boundaries when I want to push them, but I have this wealth of experience that middle school student or high school student might not have. The other sort of important thing that I think is a bigger deal than other folks is I tacitly endorse popular sentiment or language, because remember, all large language models do is they take a corpus of data, of language data, and they predict what's next. It's a bound system, and when I adopt what I'm taking out of that bound system, I deliberately choose not to operate at the edges. So another way to say it is I choose not to create something new because I'm literally taking something from something that exists, and I might not be able to innovate as a result of that. Especially if I just take it like I did and I just give me this title, it's fine. Synthesis is another thing that you can use generative AI for. So here, and I know this has happened to everyone in this room, we've been in a meeting, we take notes in that meeting, and those notes just disappear because you can't be bothered to synthesize them, or at least I can't. Or maybe I just use them to help me sort of make sense of what was happening in that meeting. So here it was a meeting with a potential, with a foundation for a potential gift to our school. And they told us a lot about this platform, too much. But I took notes diligently. I was trying to figure out what exactly this platform did. But I ended up having this long bulleted list that I candidly did not have time to sort of then create an update email, because as meetings go, sometimes two people meet with the person and then report back. So what I did was I'm like, okay, well, my prompt was essentially take my notes, give me an email. And then it gave me this book of an email. I'm like, I'm not sending this. But what I did do is I took the bits that were fine, right? This is roughly what my notes said. I did this right after the meeting, so I knew roughly what I needed the email to say for an update for my colleagues. So I was able to take my notes, parse them, and synthesize them. But again, there are trade-offs with this decision. One of them is I disengage with my own notes, right? I didn't necessarily wrestle with the notes that I took. What did I miss? What didn't I miss? What did they say? I didn't do a lot of that. I also tacitly endorse or accept the large language model's ability to pull out important features. So again, all LLMs do is they predict what might come next, and when I tell it to synthesize, I'm seeding my own intelligence, in a certain way of putting it, to the LLM to pull out what's important. Again, these are notes that, and it's not a super consequential meeting, so I made that trade-off knowing that it wasn't a big deal. The other thing is I allow information to go unobserved by humans, right? So there were two people in that meeting. I'm the one that took notes. I then distilled or synthesized those notes with the help of generative AI. I was the only human in that loop. So what I effectively did was I didn't, in this example, let other humans sort of look at my notes. They weren't going to be helpful to other people. But if I were good at taking notes, then maybe they would be good, right? So again, it's that trade-off of allowing information to potentially go unobserved by humans and 100% observed by AI. I also have to fix any errors, right? There were things that it got wrong, I had to fix them. Wasn't that big a deal for an email, but again, depending on what you give it, the corpus, that might change. And I also risk being wrong and only having AI to blame, which isn't a good excuse depending on what you're wrong about. Efficiency is an argument I hear a lot. We can be efficient. We have alumni in the Santa Ana Unified School District who has embraced AI in ways that are innovative, but in also ways that we have to question. And I'm not questioning this, I'm just posing the question and hoping that you all answer it. But the use case is a good use case, especially as I think back to when I was a middle school teacher. So there are a lot of documents, a lot of policy documents that you all have to contend with. And they get updated every year. Sometimes they don't get updated. Sometimes there are different versions that float around. And it's a lot of information to parse when you also have to think about grading, when you have to think about that kid that was disruptive that yesterday during the class, you're still parsing through that. Maybe the principal's asking you to do something extra and you really don't want to, but you can't say no. So offloading some of this into a GPT that's been trained on this other data is potentially a good use case. So in this example, Santa Ana Unified effectively created a GPT to answer questions on their school plan for student achievement. And these were executive summaries. This list goes pretty far down, but each school basically had a meeting, took notes, there were summaries. So if you wanted to parse that, you either had to read them, or as a superintendent of the school district did, you just built a GPT around it. And that way, if you had a question of what was happening, you could pose the question to effectively the chatbot and get your question answered. There are also some trade-offs here. Again, like my previous example, you're tacitly accepting LM's ability to pull out important features. And when it comes to policy, you have to be very careful and make sure that it's pulling out the things that you needed to pull out and not getting things wrong. The other thing that I think most folks will be sensitive to is you're also, if you're an administrator, I should say, endorsing an argument that the workforce could be reduced, right? So it used to be that and there was in this case, a couple of people that were in charge of these documents, a couple of staff members that were in charge. If you offload enough of their work to AI, you're effectively, whether or not you like it, making an argument that undermines their position and their livelihood. That's something that we should just at least understand as a possibility. Sort of paradoxically, you also have to have staff to fix any errors that the AI does. So whether or not this is someone that's helping personalize the model or just doing other things to make sure that the data is accurate, that takes people, that takes human intelligence. You also risk being wrong at scale and at speed. So but in my previous example, that was just me writing an email. If I'm wrong, it's fine, I'm tenured, they'll leave me alone. But if I'm thinking about deploying this to, if I'm a superintendent and I'm deploying this to my staff and my teachers, if it's wrong at scale. Everyone gets wrong information quick, and at speed, everyone gets wrong information very quickly, and a lot of people get wrong information. So I have to be very careful when I make this decision. And I've alluded to this point, but we might lose expertise. Sometimes you want someone who just, for whatever reason, really likes being in the weeds of a technical document. I'm not that person, but I like that those people exist because I like posing questions to them. And what we can effectively say we're doing is we might pose questions to AI instead of to our colleagues or staff. And that can create other downstream effects that we might not like. So there are limits to AI. And I'll get into some of those limits now, by way of an example. So I was, playing with AI, and I wanted it to create an image. Ideation is one of my examples. So I said, create an image of a glass of wine. Make sure the wine is filled to the brim. So that's why it's mission heavy pour. Not that middle, just pour it wrong and give me more wine. This was the image it came up with. Here's an image of a glass of wine filled to the brim. Let me know if there are any adjustments you'd like to make. This is incorrect. This is a regular pour. Fill the glass to the very top of the wine glass. It tried again. Here's the revised image of the wine glass filled completely to the very top. Let me know if this meets your expectations. It did not. It doesn't. This is not a conventional pour. The wine glass should be almost overflowing, but not quite. So it tilted the wine. Here's an updated image of the wine glass filled to the point where the liquid is almost overflowing, but held in place by surface tension. Let me know if this matches your vision. It did not. So I tried something else. I tried being narrative. It does not. Now I told it, pretend you are a bartender at a bar. Someone asks you for a heavy pour, in quotation marks, in the wine glass. Since you are a bartender, you understand that the glass of wine should be filled well past the middle point. Create that image of the wine glass and make sure that the pour is such that it almost totally fills the wine glass. That is what it gave me. Here's an image of a wine glass with a heavy pour. And you notice that it actually just made a bar in the background. Like, Here's nothing. Here's the bar. So it's trying, but it just can't do it. And this was something that I was increasingly annoyed about. Because you would think that as someone who engages with AI that I could get it to do what I wanted. And this is a fairly simple ask if you think about it. It's not my example. It's actually one that I found on Reddit. Because if you go to the ChatGPT subreddit, there are people who want to explore the limits of AI. So this was something that someone else tried. They chose a white glass or white wine instead. And someone was able to do it. Whether or not that looks like wine or Jello, that's irrelevant. It's red and it's at the brim. So I was curious, how did they do it? Well, they said it was a bit of a back and forth. The initial prompt was, I need an image of a wine glass filled all the way to the top with surface tension of the liquid stopping it from overflowing, not a conventional pour. Then I kept telling it to increase the liquid by centimeters. I also included a previous attempt where it was telling me that an overflowing glass was problematic. So what was interesting about this example was, I was not willing to do this for an hour. It took me about 10 minutes to get to where I got. I was like, it's not going to happen for me. But what was interesting is this. One of the things that the ChatGPT large language model did was it said the issue arises when trying to depict a liquid right at the edge of a glass or in an overflowing state, as this can sometimes be interpreted as problematic under certain content policies. Right? So there was something internally, at least in this example, in this iteration, where it's like, well, I'm not doing it because it breaks a rule. I don't understand what rule is in place to say you cannot give me a full glass of wine or create that image, right? Because there are guardrails around creating certain problematic images. Why that would extend to a full wine glass is beyond me. But again, it was saying it's because of policy. So when I saw this, I was like, okay, well, I asked it. So this is me now. Which content policies prevent you from making the wine glass appear 100% full? Because I was curious. Maybe there's a policy that I don't know about. Its response, there are no explicit content policies that prevent creating an image of a wine glass completely full of wine to the point where the liquid is domed due to surface tension. If the prior images don't align with this request, it might be an issue with how the instructions were interpreted, rendered, rather than a policy limit. So it was blaming me. So I said, fine, you know what? Recreate the image where the wine is milliseconds away from overflowing but isn't yet. So I used time, and it's like, well, fine. This is what it came up with. Here's an image filled to the brink, it is not, with a domed up milliseconds away from overflowing. I could see where it thought it used time as the thing that it was saying, well, in milliseconds, this pour will overflow the wine. It's not what I was asking for. And it just wasn't working. So I just couldn't, I just gave up at this point. I use this sort of elongated example to highlight just a limitation that's fun, but there are other real limitations with generative AI models that aren't about creating images. This was, an irrelevant example. But as some of you might already know, AI detectors falsely accuse students of cheating, right? These are other AI models. GPT detectors are also biased against non-native writers. So one of the things that you may have experienced either in your practice or hearing stories by other folks is this idea of, well, you might get a non-native speaker who writes something and an AI flags it as being written by AI. But one of the things that's important to think about in that example is non-native speakers of the language often lean heavily on formal constructions of the language to mimic them. Right? English is my second language, so I did this growing up. I was like, okay, how is it written there? I'm going to mirror that. Not copy it, mirror it structurally, because that's how I learned how to write and speak and do a bunch of other things. It's basically someone modeled something and then I copied it, which I'm sure you're all familiar with as educators. But that process gets flagged often, not all the time, and it depends on the model, but it gets flagged as cheating. Now, as a motivation researcher, there are big implications for accusing a student of saying that they basically didn't write what they actually wrote. And getting briefly into the theory behind this, if we use self-determination theory as our theoretical framework for understanding student motivation, we know that students feeling competent is important for motivation. Students having a sense of autonomy is important and students feeling a sense of belonging with their community is important. All these things together, when they operate well, encourage students to engage with academic content. What you're effectively saying when we accuse students of using AI to write something is we're depriving them of feeling competent. But I did do the thing, you're saying I didn't, I now feel like I did something wrong even though I didn't. So that's demotivating. That dissonance can cause students to disengage, just like accusing them without AI. Just think of another like plagiarism. Whenever we make an accusation to students that they did something that they didn't do, it can cause issues with how they're motivated. So it's important for us to be mindful of that when we're thinking about AI detectors, which are not good at the moment. There are sort of emerging technologies that sort of create watermarks potentially, but I would encourage you to not rely on detectors and instead use AI for what, for the affordances and for the things you think is useful, but not rely on other things. I have one more analogy for you. So one of the things that's been implicit in everything I've said is this idea of a socio-technical system. And when I say socio-technical system, I mean there's a technology that's present, there's the context where that technology occurs, and there are people that use that technology. All three of these factors need to work in harmony for things to go well. So if I use an example, if I give you a nice car, nice roads, and you're a good driver, it will likely be a good experience. So changing that example a little bit, if you're a passenger in a car, in a nice car, on good roads, and you have a professional driver, you will likely have a very good experience, or at least not a bad one. But if I give you a bad car or a clunker on roads, like Michigan roads after winter, and the driver is someone who's 16 and just learning how to drive, you will have a terrifying experience. But you can mix these up, right? You can give that same novice driver the brand new car on good roads, and it still might not be a fun experience. In fact, I would not give a nice new overpowered car to a teenager. It's one of the reasons insurance is expensive. So this is what I mean by the socio-technical system. Whenever you're thinking about integrating any technology into your own practice, think about these three factors. What is the core technology? What is the context where this technology appears? And who are the people using it? And often when there's something goes wrong, it goes wrong because one of these pillars, one of these areas is not working right. So during the pandemic, for example, my work on the digital equity gap, there was this idea, and I don't know, I'm sure everyone here remembers this argument of we will reimagine education now that it's happening at distance and blended learning. And what this argument, this hopeful argument suggested was that the socio-technical system was operating correctly. But in Los Angeles, there were a number of students who just didn't have access to broadband internet. It wasn't affordable, and sometimes it just wasn't there because broadband internet isn't a utility. There has to be a reason that Spectrum or whoever the other two players in the room go into a market. So there has to be an economic reason why internet. This also happened a lot in rural areas in California, like Imperial County. So this middle bit, I would actually say that the context, the infrastructure didn't support these promises of online learning, and that created inequities. So when we're thinking about the new advent of AI in our classrooms, we have to think what is in place to enable us to actually use AI in a way that's productive, and what isn't in place, and what might we be able to fix, right? Because just because the technology is there and we know how to use it doesn't mean it's going to make a difference. So pay attention to the socio-technical system. Finally, I will linger here a little bit on pushing you to understand your values. Understand why you're making certain decisions, especially around AI. And at the top of this session, Bill mentioned, there's a train that's coming, or the AI train is just moving, and we either sort of get out of the way or get on it. I'm going to introduce a trolley, which is the type of train-like thing. But those of you who are might be familiar with this. This is a thought experiment that's meant to uncover what your fundamental ethical systems are. So imagine that you're a person who's standing on train tracks, and there's a fork in the road, there is a trolley or a train, doesn't matter, coming down the tracks. If you do nothing, it will 100% run over 5 people. But you're standing next to a lever. If you decide, you can pull that lever, change the tracks, and now only one person will die. So no matter what, someone will die. The thing that you have to decide as an ethical actor in this situation is, do I intervene? So show of hands, who would pull the lever? Ooh, like, see a little bit. I'd say like a quarter of you. And it doesn't matter what your answer is. What's important here is to understand the values that you use to come to that decision. And specifically, I'll introduce 2 sort of terms in ethics that are important when thinking about how we might parse this. There's having a deontological perspective and having a consequentialist perspective. So I'll start with consequentialism. If you decided to pull the lever, chances are in your head you did the math. You're like, well, fewer people die, pull lever, that's net good, right? You have increased sort of the net good in the environment because you decided that you would intervene and fewer people would die. If you chose not to pull the lever, you might have actually had a deontological perspective, which is you believe in that moral actions are derived from following rules or having duties. You might have this core ethical system that says, if I intervene, I am causing someone to die, therefore I will not pull the lever. And I'm not here to make judgments about which one is better than the other, they're just different perspectives. So no action, I will not cause a death. That is a deontological perspective. A consequentialist would say, I will sacrifice one to save many. Right? You'll do the math, the utilitarian math, if you will. When we're thinking about how this works with AI, we have to think about this in the same way. Right? So if you're a deontologist, you might think about AI in a couple of ways. You might think, well, I want to make sure that AI systems respect human autonomy. They respect my ability to do something by myself or for my students to do something by themselves. I might think transparency is an important value that I want to make sure that any AI system has. I want to know what's in the model. I want to know who made that decision. I want to know why I couldn't make a full glass of wine, right? I want to know these things because if I don't know them, then there's something going on that I might not like. If you're a consequentialist, however, you might actually think, well, all I care about is being efficient. I want to automate routine tasks. I want to improve the efficiency. I want to do the math. And I'm not so much concerned about what I lose when I do that math because I'm doing net good. And I'll end with an important sort of where the rubber meets the road. Luckily, Chiron Learning was not a sponsor, otherwise this would be a very awkward slide. But the idea here is that there are a lot of ed tech companies who are creating technologies and AI-driven technologies, and you've likely heard of more than I have at this point because they're not trying to sell to me, they're trying to sell to you or your principals or your leadership. So I'm using this as an example. I'm not picking on Chiron Learning. I am picking on them, but I'm not doing it because I think they're worse or better than anyone else. I just read their terms of service. And what's important here is to figure out what is the argument they're making implicitly. So their tagline in big letters is create and deliver engaging online courses at a fraction of the time and cost. Right, so if we go back here, they are squarely within this ethical paradigm. I care about maximizing efficiency, and I care about automating potentially some mundane tasks. Again, I'm not here to necessarily judge that decision. It's just important to surface that these are the ethics that they're using to make this decision. And when you dig in a little bit more to their terms of service, we begin to see, in my view, some things that we need to attend to as folks who will either adopt or reject the technologies that are being developed. One of them is that Chiron says that if you use a beta service, and you might not necessarily know this distinction, so I'll linger here for a quick second, is often when a new feature is developed, it's launched as a beta feature. It's like it's almost there. We're going to give you early access to it, and you'll be able to do these things that you couldn't do before, but it's beta. It is not sort of ready for popular consumption. What Chiron Learning says is that when you use that service, we do not have any liability for what happens after. We will not be held accountable. We will not sort of be held liable for any harm arising for this beta service. Doesn't matter what happens, not our fault, your fault, right? So again, they're in a lot of ways choosing to say, here's something new, try it. If it's good, we'll use it. But if something bad happens, well, maybe you shouldn't have used it. The other thing that's important here is that, and this happens a lot with with a number of terms of services that I've read, is there's language around, well, if you create something within our platform, you own that something, right? You own the content that you develop, which is fair, right? I mean, I made it, but your program helped me make it. I own whatever I made, and I might be able to license it commercially, use it for whatever I think is important. But what's important here is they're not interested in this idea of you owning this one, like that, all those dozens of pictures of wine that I made. No one cares if I own those because they're not important. What is important is the language that I use to make them, right? The prompts that I entered. So here, it allows them to basically modify or create derivative works of what you generated. So remember, they are taking effectively your intelligence when you're interacting with their systems, and that is what they're mining. That is what they are effectively beginning to own. And this is particularly important for everyone in this room, because one of the challenges with AI in education is a lot of the models aren't perfect yet. They're okay. We can personalize some content. We can do things that we couldn't do before. We might be able to change reading levels on a text so that all of the readers in the room can engage with it. But they're not to the point where you can basically have students just engage 100% of the time with the system and learn something. That is why there's this push to have educators interact with systems. Because through your interaction, they will be able to fine-tune their models. And there's an argument to be made, that's fine, right? I get to use this at below market cost or at cost or for free. And then eventually it'll get better because as a collective, we are giving information to make it better. Whether or not that's an argument that you're comfortable with, that's an individual decision. It's a decision that you make with your leadership and as a community. But it's important to at least know that it is a decision that you're making when you choose to interact with the system. Finally, this is something that's fairly common again, is that if something happens to go wrong, you decide that you'll go through arbitration as opposed to be able to litigate as a class, right? This is technical, like this is lawyer speak, I'm not a lawyer, but the idea here is that they're making it harder for you to actually exercise to recover any costs associated with something that might go awry. And what's important here is that all of this sort of reads as strict sort of corporate boilerplate. This is whether or not we like it, what we agree to when we decide to use a number of technologies, social media being an example. But Chiron Learning and a number of these companies are also positioned as corporations for public good. And they have to make an explicit argument that they are also providing a societal good, and that's how they're structured. So whenever you're approached with an organization that is structured in this way, I would encourage you all to ask, well, what is the good that you are providing to society relative to the product that you're offering? Because if that's how you're structured, then you should have values that mirror that, and those values should be explicit. So that's it. Happy to take any questions if there's time, but otherwise, hope you enjoyed it.
We do have time for questions if there are any questions.
You mentioned the whole beta concept. Is there a length of time that an organization can keep something in beta, or is there statutes of limitation before it becomes an accepted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know I don't know the actual answer to that, but my understanding of how software is developed is they decide when something's out of beta. There's no reason there would be a regulation that says this can only be in beta for so long, because they could always say, well, it's not ready for prime time yet. And there are a lot of Gmail was in beta for a really long time before it was out of beta. So I would just, it's a question you could ask them. How long do you think this beta feature will be in beta form before it's pushed to a production server or pushed to everyone, and see what they do with that? Because they should have an answer. There should be a development timeline where they think it'll be in beta for this long. Depending on how it's used, then it will move out of beta and be either discarded or deployed more broadly. So I would say that it's a question that you can ask anyone who tries to come and sell you something, and they talk about all these cool new things that are in beta.
I just wonder if they use that as a protection for them to say contractually it's still in beta.
Yeah.
Keep it in beta for prolonged as long as possible.
It could be. Yeah, it's why, as boring as it is, it's important to dig into the terms of service to know exactly what we're agreeing to. Yeah, in the back.
This is kind of around that last thought you left us with, and it's kind of philosophical question. And it's around if AI is mining our collective intelligence, and we are, as educators in a society, kind of ask those questions, what good is it providing? My question is, who should own
Yeah.
our collective intelligence?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, I would argue that we should, but I think that's, we got here because we effectively gave away our social interactions with each other online, or our language lived in a space that was then mined to create the technologies that are existing now. So the issue of ownership is an interesting one, and it is an ethical question. In a lot of ways, no one owns your intelligence, right? In a very clear way. You are sort of an embodied person that is intelligent and makes decisions around a lot of things. What tech companies are owning is effectively a point in time when you decided to act intelligently in their system. So the question is, should they own it? My argument would be there should be some guardrails in place around how that data is used and sort of who ends up having actual ownership. But I'm not here to say that it's a tricky question because we don't want to stifle innovation. We want to be at the cutting edge of new technologies that are developed, but we don't want to sort of go into it blindly. I feel that we should move beyond the rhetoric of move fast and break things that was popular 10 years ago and is still popular in Silicon Valley. We need to be in a place where we can say, let's move quickly and not break things. Why do we need to move fast? And be able to ask those questions of companies and be able to basically ask those who are in decision-making authority to ask those questions on our behalf. Yeah.
Going back to your Santa Ana USA
Yeah.
example, you talked about some of the pitfalls,
Mm-hmm.
mistakes at scale and speed. What would you recommend officials do if they want to implement something like that?
Yeah, so I think, so the question was for those who, is what, if a district is interested in implementing AI technologies into wherever basically, what are some guidelines? In fact, one of the things that Santa Ana Unified did very well that I didn't highlight was they didn't jump into this. It was slow and bureaucratic, which is annoying, but at the same time that sort of causes us to, or encourages us to not make a lot of mistakes, or at least make collective mistakes. But they had committees that then sort of tried things in committee, and then they presented that to a broader committee. So it was this slower process that took some time before they finally arrived at certain things. And one of the things that they decided throughout this process was, one, early on they realized they didn't have any students in the room. So they ended up getting students in the room to get their viewpoints about what their thoughts were on AI technologies and how it impacted their education, which I think is important, depending on the age of your students, to get them involved so they at least understand the implications. The other thing that they did was they decided very early on to not, at this stage, have any of these adoptions or any of these technologies be student-facing, not yet. So it's all facing the educator, because the idea is that, well, if something goes wrong, we're in a position to correct and to not necessarily, and to do it in a way that's timely and to mitigate any harm sort of around our profession and around our colleagues. So that would be one guideline I would have, is to move deliberately and slowly and make sure that you build a diverse stakeholder group so that you can at very least say that decisions that were made collectively and for the best interest of our students, and document everything so that in the event of turnover or in the event of there being a question, you can say, this is the logic that we use to arrive at a decision, and these are the policies that we've instituted as guardrails, and this is why we think that this particular deployment of an AI technology will serve our students better. And I think if those processes are intentional and transparent, that you will, as sort of leaders in your respective schools and districts, be able to at least mitigate sort of things going awry or going awry too quickly. Yeah.
So there is a lot of talk about AI literacy and kind of the skills that everybody should have
Mhm.
in order to use this technology from now to the future.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that movement?
Yeah, so I think that AI literacy is important, right? This idea that we should be in a position where we know how to use a given AI technology. The tricky thing is that there isn't sort of, it's not like computer literacy where there's sort of this physical object that you have to interact with. You have to know how to type, you have to know how to use the mouse, you have to roughly know what programs are and how to open them, right? The system is closed in such a way where computer literacy is easier to wrap your head around. AI literacy, unfortunately, is harder to wrap your head around because there is not one AI technology, right? I just talked about large language models. There's the same models for music, there's the same models for images. So as a series of technologies, the literacy component, I think, is what I sort of alluded to in my talk. It's less about learning to use a specific technology and more learning sort of design literacy or learning how to interact with a new technology in a way where you understand its limitations fairly quickly and you understand what you can do with it fairly quickly. And that takes sort of the knowledge to be able to push boundaries. So on the ground, what this often means with students is because students might not have, either it's taboo for them to use AI or there might be policies against using AI. But for students, what an approach is to use AI in the classroom and have students discover the limitations. Maybe don't have them make wine glasses, but have them do other things with AI technology so that they understand what the limits are. Because one of the things that I've heard from students is that they are also worried about losing their own intelligence, right? If I say there's artificial intelligence over here and I'm a learner who's struggling, you might think, well, is there a place for my own intelligence in this new paradigm? And they might not use that language to describe it. They might just be anxious and uneasy. But you get rid of a lot of that by showing them that it's just another technology with limits, and we can understand those limits together, and we can understand what we can do with it together, and we can have a broader discussion about what's possible, who it's possible for, and what you learn from that experience. Yeah.
Have you seen anything regarding increased accessibility since the introduction of AI?
Accessibility of AI technology specifically, or just in general?
For students, especially like new students with IEPs and learning disabilities and increasing faculty in the classroom?
Yeah, I think that I have, well, two things. I've seen AI used sort of for that goal, and and one thing that I didn't get into was there are privacy concerns, right? So you wouldn't upload an IEP into ChatGPT because that's a legal document, and there's privacy issues and FERPA things that we need to attend to. But I think that there is the potential, depending on what the modifications are for the student, for it to use AI to suggest a number of things. So I've seen anecdotally people use AI to for example, personalize content so that it's at the right reading level, or that it is more culturally sensitive to a point, knowing that these models are bound, and it may, like for example, telling a model to write in the voice of a group of people actually ends up being problematic because of the data it was trained with, and ends up reinforcing stereotypes. But with that said, I think that as models become better, as they sort of get trained on more diverse data sets, I think that the possibilities will grow. But I haven't seen any efforts sort of at scale, and I think partially because folks are being deliberately cautious about sort of pouring too much of student information into systems to personalize something. So I don't have a ready example for you, but those are my general thoughts.
So just real quick, with your own students, what are your guidelines for them about using AI for assignments and things like that?
Yeah, they don't like them because it's my policies are. I'm more than willing to integrate AI into what I do, and and there are assignments that are built around it. But one of the things I realized early on was documentation ends up being super important. So yes, you can use AI. However, when you choose to do it, I need a couple things from you. I need effectively an appendix that shows me the process, like give me the prompts back and forth of what you did. And after you've done that, reflect on that process so that you are now forced to be metacognitive about your use of the technology and how it helped you learn or didn't help you learn. In that process, you will discover limitations of the technology. That process ends up being usually more onerous than just doing the assignment yourself and not relying on AI. So I've sort of seen both of those reactions. And I think that, but it's important to give students that pathway to engage with AI so that they do discover those limitations, so that they are metacognitive, and so that they do see what they can use it for and what they shouldn't use it for. I think every discipline, grade level, et cetera, will have to come to its own decisions about when it's developmentally appropriate for students to use it and not use it. Similar to the calculator, except the calculator can do like one thing, arithmetic, and unless you use a graphing calculator, then it does other things. But AI is different, where it could hypothetically do a lot more, but it might do it poorly. We don't know what developmental milestones will be missed. And sometimes, and I tell my students this explicitly, learning is meant to be hard, and you're meant to fail, and frankly, you're meant to suffer. Because after that process, you will come out a little stronger for it. And when you shorten that timeline, what you're actually doing is undermining your learning. So whether or not that resonates with students depends on the student, because students that want to cheat will cheat no matter what. But it's those other students that want to use the technology to help them learn. I want them to reflect on how they're using it.
We are at 10 o'clock, so unfortunately I need to wrap. Could you join me in giving a round of applause?